Welcome back, Wanderers. It's Naidra. At this point in the season, it's about time we start breaking off from some of those meta builds like Ball Lightning and start trying out something new. And in this season, Diablo really has made it possible to be able to try out different types of builds that can all achieve pit 100 or even potentially higher than that. And while we still seem to be lacking some content, the variety of builds that they have provided for this season has been a lot of fun. And so for today, I'm going to bring to you guys a Meteor build that I've been able to take all the way up to pit level 105. And in addition to that, we're not min-maxed. We still have some area of opportunity when it comes to some of our gear. And I'll show you guys what that looks like in just a few moments here. Before we get to that part, we're going to go ahead and jump into a couple of demos. We'll do a Belial demo, and then we'll also jump into a pit afterwards, just so you guys can see how the build works and what it can do. And then we'll come back to town and we'll take a look and see what's making it happen. Before we get to that part though, if you guys have not yet subscribed to the channel, please don't forget to do so below. That's the best way for you guys to support me and also help me out in return. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Alrighty, so when we're going up against bosses, what you're going to want to do with this build first is you're going to want to make sure that we've got all 4 stacks of our sparks so we can take full advantage of having that. We're then going to activate our ice armor as well. Meanwhile, we'll have Blizzard running in the background, and then we'll go ahead and just spam Inferno and also Meteor. So let's go ahead and take a look and see how that's going to work. We should be able to take them down pretty quickly at this point. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and start off with our Blizzard. We'll put on our ice armor and start shooting off a couple of sparks just so that we can get that 4th stack. And then we should be able to basically one-shot him if he didn't have that additional armor, but allows us to really take him down super quickly and really easily. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the pit and see what we can do there. Alrighty, so similar to what you guys just saw with the Belial demo, the way that this build is going to work is we're going to want to make sure we've got our 4 stacks of Spark active pretty much at all times. This is going to give us a pretty significant damage buff overall, so we got to make sure we've got that. We've also are going to make sure that we've got our Blizzard active, at least 1 Blizzard at a time. We don't need to spam that, we just need to have 1 active. And then we've got Ice Armor here too. Ice Armor is giving us an additional damage buff as well, so it's really good to make sure that we've got all 3 of those things going at all times. Now beyond that, we are going to be spamming our Meteor along with our Inferno as well to make sure we're maximizing on our overall damage output. Now this build is not currently using any types of mythics. If you guys have mythics, that is something that definitely can push this a little bit further. The mythics I would recommend for this is going to be the Ring of Starless Skies, and if you have a Shaco or a Air of Perdition, those are also really going to significantly increase the damage that you're going to be putting out and making this build quite a bit faster as well. Now that being said, let's go ahead and get this started. So like I said, we'll go ahead and start off with our 4 stacks of Spark, and then we'll go ahead and start spamming basically everything else afterwards. The nice thing about this build is that it is doing about 150 billion damage per hit, up to 150 billion damage per hit, with our overall DPS being in the trillions, allowing you to really just clear any endgame content without any problem at all, including up to pit 105. Now, pit level 100 is going to take about 5 minutes or so to complete. With the boss really not being a problem, the boss really only takes about 15, maybe 20 seconds tops. The bigger problem is being able to get to the boss. That takes a little bit longer. The other thing is we can go up to pit 110 with this, but unfortunately because we don't have quite enough damage to be able to handle that as easily, it does take almost the entire time to be able to complete that part of it. So pit 110 is possible. It's just going to take quite a bit longer to be able to complete it, and that just is really exhausting in my opinion. Now let's go ahead and see if we can get one more group before we go back to town and see exactly what's making this happen. Notice how the numbers are highlighted in yellow here, indicating that we're dealing critical strikes with every single one of our hits. We're not doing any overpower with this build, but every single one of our hits that we are dealing is overpowered damage. So I think you guys see how this build works. Again, really fun. I love seeing all the flashing on the screen at all times. Let's go back to town and see what's making this happen. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and start off by taking a look at our equipment. For our equipment, starting off with our weapon, we are going to be using a 2-handed staff with this, and that's going to be paired with the Shattered Stars aspect. Now the reason we're using a 2-handed staff is because our Shattered Stars gives our meteorites 100% of meteor's damage when we're putting it on a 2-handed weapon. So it is really important that we're using a 2-handed weapon with this. Now as far as our stats, we're looking for something that's got intelligence and critical strike damage on there. If you can get something that's got a GI on both of those, that would be fantastic. The damage part of it does not really matter with this build. You don't have to have that on there. You can put whatever you want on for that 3rd stat. Taking a look at our tempering, we're going to want to temper on critical strike damage. In addition, we're also going to temper on chance for meteorites to deal double damage. Now, when you masterwork this, if you can, you want to try to throw all 3 of your masterworking points into chance for meteorites to deal double damage. The closer we get this to 100%, the more damage you're going to deal. Now, that is something I've been seriously struggling with this season, is having enough materials to be able to temper or masterwork as much as I need to. So sadly, like I mentioned during the demo, this is not completely min-maxed yet, and a part of that is really just from the masterworking and the tempering. Next up, taking a look at our boots, we are using the Starfall Coronet for our boots. Now, this guy, you want to make sure you get one that's got a GA on Meteor, and we're going to throw all 3 of your masterworking points into Meteor as well. While meteor size can be fun, you don't need to have the meteor size, and we've got quite a bit of cooldown reduction as it is, so the best place to put our masterworking points and our GA, if you have one, is going to be into Meteor. Next up, for our pants, we are using the Crown of Lucian with this, and the only thing that really matters on this piece of equipment is going to be the cooldown reduction, and therefore we want to make sure we get one that's got a GA on cooldown reduction as well. Now, when you masterwork this, we are going to throw all 3 of your masterworking points into cooldown reduction as well. Now, moving on to our gloves, we're going to be using legendary gloves with the flash fire aspect on it. We want to get a pair of gloves that's got intelligence plus the core skills, and either critical strike damage or attack speed will both be really helpful. Now, when we go to temper this, we're going to want to make sure that we temper on meteor size and also critical strike damage as well. Now, the GA for this guy should go on core skills, and same thing with your masterworking. Try to throw all 3 of your masterworking points into core skills as well. This is one of the couple of pieces I have that I was actually lucky enough to get all 3 of those masterworking points on the right spot that I needed it to go on. Next up, we've got our chest armor. For our chest armor, we are going to be using Lochran's Talisman. Now, for the Chaos equipment, it really doesn't matter which order you have these in. I don't care if you have your chest armor on your pants or on your boots or vice versa. As long as you've got the same matching Chaos armors on, it's still going to be able to do the same thing. When looking at this, if you have one with the GA, we want the GA to either be on all stats or critical strike damage, or both if you can get something like that, with all 3 of your masterworking points going into critical strike damage. Now, once again, this is another one of those pieces where I was not able to luck out where I wanted to, but it's still getting the job done. Next up, for our helmet, we are using Flicker Step with this. The reason we're using Flicker Step is it allows us to reset our ultimate cooldown pretty much all of the time, meaning that our meteorites are going to be taking full advantage of the additional damage output that they're getting from having Inferno active. And trust me, you're going to be getting a huge damage buff from having Inferno on, so you really want to make sure that you're able to cast that as frequently as possible. Now, if you have a Shaco or Air of Perdition, you could throw one of those on as well. It is going to give you a nice damage buff as well, keeping in mind that if you do that, you're going to need to make a couple of other changes to make sure that you've got a good amount of cooldown reduction to allow you to reset your ultimate as frequently as you need to in order to make sure we're dealing as much damage. So if you end up doing that, you may want to throw on regular boots that has attacks reduce your evades cooldown, and then you'll put your Starfall Coronet on your gloves. And then at that point, we're also going to take the flash fire aspect and put that onto our ring. So I know it's a little bit complex, but that will give you a little bit of an overall damage boost if you do have one of those mythic uniques. And again, those changes are really only necessary if your cooldown reduction isn't good enough to make sure that you're continuously able to use your ultimate skill. Taking a look at our amulet, we are going to be using the Armageddon aspect with this. Now, like I mentioned before, the Armageddon aspect really gives us a huge buff when it comes down to dealing damage with our meteorites, and that's all thanks to having our Inferno active. We're dealing up to 540% times more damage when we have our Inferno on, and that's why it is crucial that we've got our Inferno on 100% of the time. Now with that, we're going to want to have something that's got intelligence, and we also want to have something that potentially has 2 different passive skills on here. Now, I was able to get something that's got Permafrost, and then I got a GA on Devouring Blaze. You don't have to have these exact ones. You could also use something like Hoarfrost. Inner Flames will be great. Glass Cannon, any combination of those will give you a significant damage buff overall. So those are going to be really good to have. Now, if you've only got one of those and then you're trying to figure out what to put on for the third stat, you could go for additional attack speed. Any additional attack speed is always going to be welcome with this build. We'll go ahead and take it. Now, we're going to temper on fire damage and also Inferno cooldown reduction with this, with all 3 of our masterworking points going into Devouring Blaze or Inner Flames or one of those passive skills, unless you're having issues with your cooldown reduction for your Inferno. If your Inferno is having a hard time resetting as frequently as you need it to, you could put your masterworking points into that. However, because we are using Flicker Step with this, we don't have that problem. And so all 3 of those points for me eventually will go into Devouring Blaze. For our first ring, we are using Tal Rashas with this, and for this we want to have something that's got a GA on cooldown reduction, and this is the other item that I actually was able to get lucky enough to be able to put all 3 of my masterworking points into cooldown reduction. The more cooldown reduction we have, the faster we can move, and also the more damage we'll be able to deal. And then lastly, for our second ring, we are using the Shredding Blades aspect with this guy. Now with this, we want to have intelligence, attack speed, and critical strike damage for our stats. With the same tempering as our amulet, we're going to throw on some fire damage, and we're also going to throw on Inferno cooldown reduction as well. Now, all 3 of your masterworking points should either go into critical strike damage or Inferno cooldown reduction, again, depending on how your cooldown reduction is looking for your Inferno. That being said, for our gems, we are using diamonds for our amulet and our rings, although our resistance should be pretty close to max even without having those on there, but that's really the best way to go. For our helmet, we are using topaz. For our weapon, we're going to be using emeralds. And then for our chest armor and our pants, we want to have Tam and Thul. Thul is going to allow us to use Mystical Frost Nova, taking advantage of the additional 15% times damage we're getting from the mystical part of Frost Nova. And in addition, it is going to be freezing our enemies pretty frequently, therefore taking full advantage of things like Hoarfrost and additional damage to frozen enemies. For our pants, we are going to be using Sir and Ohm for this. That Warcry giving us additional 15% damage is really going to be super helpful as well. Now then, taking a look at our Chaos perks, for our unique Chaos perk, we are going to be using Mana Shield. I think that one's going to be pretty much standard for any Sorceress build we're going to be using for this season. For our first rare Chaos perk, we're going to be using Power Siphon. And then we've also got Explosive Combinations. Now, this is the primary reason why we have a basic skill in our bar and why we're wanting to make sure that we're maintaining maximum stacks as needed for this. And then lastly, we've also got our Advanced Techniques. Taking a look at our skills, for our skills, we are going to be taking Spark, taking it up to Enhanced Spark, and finishing that up with Glinting Spark. Now, the reason we're taking it all the way up to Glinting Spark is because this does increase our critical strike chance up to 8% when we've got our 4 stacks on here, and this is a part of the reason why all of our hits are pretty much critical strikes. Moving on down to our core skills, we're really not using any core skills, and so all 3 of our points will go into Elemental Dominance. This does also give us some additional damage output for our core skills, and our Meteor is considered a core skill. Taking a look at our defensives, we're going to put 3 points into Teleport, taking it up to Enhanced Teleport, and then finishing it up with Mystical Teleport. Now, typically we would take Shimmering Teleport for this, taking some additional damage reduction. However, this does generate Crackling Energy, and we are taking advantage of Crackling Energy to make sure we're dealing more damage with this build, and so this is going to be the better way to go, at least with this specific build. We also will be taking 3 points into Glass Cannon. And then lastly, for our defensives, we got 1 point into Ice Armor, taking it down to Enhanced Ice Armor, and finally, we've got our Mystical Ice Armor. Moving on down to our Conjuration skills, we are using Ice Blades, so we're going to take 1 point into that, up to Enhanced Ice Blades, and lastly, we've got our Roaring Ice Blades. And then we're also going to take 1 point into Align the Elements. And last but not least, for our Conjurations, we are also going to take Mana Shield for 3 points. Moving on down to our Mastery / Core skills, we're going to take just 1 point into Blizzard, taking it up to Enhanced Blizzard, and then finishing this up with Wizard's Blizzard. For the star of the show, we've got our Meteor. Now, our Meteor, we're going to be putting 5 points into this. This does have opportunity to go up to 35 plus ranks into Meteor. However, without having those additional mythic uniques, this is going to be a pretty good place to be. Taking that up to Enhanced Meteor and finishing it up with Mage's Meteor. Now, we're also going to take 3 points into Devouring Blaze and 3 points into Inner Flames. Now, keep in mind, we're getting the additional points here thanks to the amulet, and that's giving us quite a bit of additional critical strike damage. Moving on down to our ultimate skills, we are going to be taking 3 points into Permafrost, 3 points into Icy Touch, and we've got 3 points into Hoarfrost. We also will be taking 5 points into Inferno, taking that up to Prime Inferno, and then finishing this up with Supreme Inferno. Next up, we're going to take 1 point into Fiery Surge, just so that we can make our way on down to Soulfire for 3 points. We're taking 1 point into Coursing Currents, down to Convulsions. Now again, this is another one of those places where Crackling Energy is going to be helpful, along with stuff on our Paragon board as well. And then we also will be taking 3 points into Elemental Synergies, along with Evocation. And then last but not least, moving on down to our key passives, we're going to be taking Esu's Ferocity. For our enchantments, we are going to be using Teleport for our first one, and for our second enchantment, we are going to be using Ice Blades for that additional cooldown reduction. Taking a look at our Paragon board. Now, before you guys just dive into the Paragon board and start adding all of these things to your boards, one thing I do want to point out is I have added as much intelligence as I possibly can to pretty much all the boards, well, at this point anyways, being at level 248. The point of saying all of that is when you are activating your glyphs, we just want to make sure that we've got enough intelligence or enough points to just activate the glyph before we move on to the next board. Now, once you guys have all of your glyphs activated, then we'll circle back to the previous boards, and that's where we'll start adding additional intelligence. However, for now, you just need to have enough to activate it moving on to the next board. We want to make sure we've got all 5 of them activated as quickly as we possibly can. Now, that being said, the first board is going to be using the Adept glyph. Moving on to our second board, this is going to be the Fundamental Release board, and this one we're going to be pairing up with the Tactician glyph. For our third board, we'll make our way on over to the left, which is going to be Frigid Fate, and this is going to be paired up with Elementalist. We'll then jump on over to our fourth board, which is going to be all the way over to the right. This is going to be the Searing Heat board, and this is going to be paired up with the Unleash glyph. And then for our fifth and final board, we're going to be taking the Ceaseless Conduit board, and we'll go ahead and pair this up with Destruction. Now, like I mentioned, once you've got all 5 of your boards, you can circle back and maximize on all the critical strike damage from the dexterity. And once you've gotten all of that, then the only thing left to do is to maximize on as much intelligence as you possibly can. So once you've gotten to the point where all of your glyphs are fully active and you really can't do anything more with it, then just start going around looking for as much intelligence as you possibly can. Taking a look at our Mercenary. For our Mercenary, we are going to be using Subo, who's going to be using Wire Trap, taking it down to Ready at Hand. We've got Cover Fire, finishing it up with Opening Fire for that additional critical strike damage. For our Reinforcement, we are using Varyana, and she's going to be using Bloodthirst to increase our overall attack speed, and that's going to happen pretty much anytime we cast a skill while we're in battle. That's all I've got for you guys for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me and watching this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. That's going to be the best way for you guys to be able to help me out and support me as well. Until next time, Wanderers,